Hey everyone, Prime here. Today we're going to be going over who God 99 is. But jumping into this, if we look at the data mining page itself, we think that the hero, or at least the data miners think that the god is most likely going to be some sort of knight or connected to be some sort of knight. So we're going to more or less be going over mostly famous knights in this video, who have some sort of connection to gods, mythology, or religion in some way. And so we're quickly just going to go over the definition of a knight, just to, cover our bases here. And according to the Cambridge definition, it's a man given a rank of honour by a British king or queen because of his special achievements. Knight also has a right to be called Sir. And for the first person we're going to talk about, I'm wondering how that works. See, Saint Joan of Arc was born around 1412 and was born in France to a poor family. Now, she was a hard-working young girl, and the thing that set her apart from a lot of people her age was the fact that she was incredibly pious. At age 13, she began to hear voices from what she claimed were saints, these being Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, and Saint Michael. These voices instructed her to help Charles win the throne of France at Reims. Now, it was under English control at the time, and as you can imagine, it would be quite difficult for the French king to, be coronated, so he had no coronation, and his father had been dead for some time on top of that. Now, being a lady, of course, and considering the times, when she offered her services to, be a knight and fight alongside the men to push back the English, she was laughed at and mocked, and, wasn't a good time for her. But in 1429, she was granted an audience with Charles, and after that audience, some things were said, and she was sent to the siege of Orleans. The English had the city boxed in pretty well, but with Jonah in the vanguard, French forces drove the English away, and the siege ended quite quickly. Or at least it was ended, that's the point. Now, after some more military victories under her belt, Jonah was successful in actually making sure that Charles became the king, and he eventually reduced the size of his military and reduced his military actions because he just ran out of funding and monies, and so he couldn't really maintain it financially. But for her service, Jonah's family was made into nobles. That doesn't necessarily mean Jonah was done fighting, though. She eventually continued until she was defeated in battle and captured by the English. And the English knew that they couldn't really harm her or kill her because that would simply just make her a martyr. So instead, they decided to try and undermine her, and she eventually tried to escape twice, somehow surviving a pretty high fall in one of those escapes. But eventually, she is almost coerced into admitting that the voices that she heard when she was a girl was just lies or just her trickery or sorcery, and eventually she was found guilty of some sort of witchcraft or devilry of that sort and burnt alive. But yes, that's candidate number one who could potentially be in the game. Now, I just thought her story was pretty cool, that's why I included her here, and the fact that it could literally be any knight, and the fact that technically I think we have more gods than goddesses. A goddess like her who could be like Bellona, but a bit more civilized, a bit more calm, a bit less shouty and kind of loud. Yeah, I definitely welcome Joan of Arc, although that might not necessarily be the case because, or it could be. I don't know, it depends on how Hi-Rez wants to make her character. But yes, moving on, we have Saint George. He was born Christian. When it came time for George to denounce his faith and conform to the Roman gods, he refused. Now, this man, of course, was a knight, a sir, and after given some time to change his mind, and, well, he didn't, he refused to change his mind and convert to the Roman gods, the Roman faith from Christianity, he was put to death by a very painful method, death by a wheel of swords, essentially. And then, eventually, he was decapitated. But before his death, he gave charity to the poor, because, he's quite a wealthy person. He was a knight. Knights were actually somewhat wealthy in those days. There's also a legend of him fighting off a dragon, but, the story I told you is relevant, and I suppose probably the dragon story would have been the better story to tell you, but you got the other story, so there you go. But yes, he fought a dragon, so I suppose you can let your imagination run wild there. Now, moving on to probably the knight who we're going to focus on more or less. I'm not sure, I tried to balance this out fairly nicely, but King Arthur, or Arthur Pendragon. Now, he was the ruler of Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table, who fought back against the invading Saxon forces in the 5th and 6th centuries. I say ruler, leader, person in charge. Ruler might be a strong word, but yes, he was definitely in charge. The legend of King Arthur is a story that has so many changes and so many adaptations, not just in the modern day, like the TV show Merlin, and I think that Disney movie where Arthur's like a kid, and, you know, that movie that came out, like, what was it, last year? With, this chap as like the lead. Yeah, his story has a lot of variations, a lot of changes, not just in the modern day, but also in older times in history. You know, it's had many writers adapt and change the story. The real Arthur Pendragon might have actually been a commander, not so much a king, but the main part of the story is that he would have fought against the Saxons who were invading England and driven them back and out of the country. But most of the stories seem to include Arthur, his wife Guinevere, a struggle against the Romans or the Saxons, and a final boss-type character in Mordred, after which Arthur is wounded, quite badly I might add, and goes to Avalon to heal and, you know, be happy and merry and all of that. It also includes Merlin. They seem to include Merlin now quite a bit. And, of course, Excalibur, Arthur's great sword. That there's a lot of variations is the point. Not necessarily all of them were in the original version, which is why High-Res actually with Arthur has so much freedom. And unlike a lot of the rest of these characters, with the exception of the one that we're going to be talking about after King Arthur, they actually have a lot of power to make up their own backstory for Arthur, and it just fits their story perfectly because they can literally shape it just for their story if they want to. I don't know how many of you that might accept if they go too off the rails with it, but, you know, it's a bit like the Cthulhu mythos, in the sense that it's a lot more easy to edit because the concrete canon, whilst it does exist, you know, I suppose you have to tie yourself to a very particular writer or storyteller, because there are quite a few, and, you know, quite a few retellings and reimaginations of the story as well. That doesn't take away from the story too much, you just have so many avenues with which to express your fanboy or girl-ling-ism. I don't know what the correct word for that is, but you get my point, I'm sure. I do want to probably do a follow-up video on King Arthur and the next character. The next character is Merlin. I'm just going to stop saying the next character now. So there's that. So we'll just move on to Merlin now. And Merlin is another character with a lot of variations, as you might expect, because he's more or less tied to King Arthur's stories as well. That's not to say that the only times Merlin existed, or in any sort of storytelling ways, is through Arthur's story, because that's not quite true. Merlin is his own separate character. He appears as a young boy, an old man, a sort of aged, hippie-type, nature-loving guy. So yeah, he's got quite a few appearances. But the one we're going to focus on is actually as the young boy. And you see, Geoffrey of Monmouth's stories say that Merlin was the son of a demon and a mortal lady, born with wisdom and powers. His mother herself was a princess turned nun. Father, when I say demon, most likely an incubus, you know, the male version of a succubus. So yeah, King Vortigern had lost a battle and territory to the Saxons, so he fled to go build a castle for safety, but each time he tried to make progress with its walls, they would crumble and fall. The elders advised the king to find a fatherless boy and use his blood with the wall to build materials to build a stable wall. But when Merlin was found and brought before the king, he revealed their agenda and informed the king of the real issue. That issue being that there were two dragons underneath the castle, and, you know, they were kind of causing trouble for the structural integrity of the entire thing, so it fell down every single time. And eventually, once the dragons sort of moved from that spot and did battle, why did I pronounce it like that? They do battle, and this battle is supposed to be symbolic of future events between the Saxons and the Britons, in which ultimately the Saxons will win and conquer Britain, but there'll be this time where the Britons' forces will push back the Saxons. So anyways, I'm not too sure what actually happens to the lying elders, if they're put to death or whatever, but Merlin sees that the walls are built safely after the dragons are moved, and the castle is named after Merlin. Not the name Merlin, but another name that Merlin tells the king that is his name. So, yeah, that name. And after Vortigern dies, Merlin, because remember Merlin was a boy when he first met Vortigern, goes on to counsel some other rulers, but eventually crosses path with Uther. And Uther Pendragon is given the name Pendragon by Merlin, who during this process of Uther becoming king, because Uther's father would have died and the throne passed to Uther, Merlin does a bit of magics in the process. So yeah, Merlin's a wizard, or a sorcerer, or a teacher, counselor, a special man, Merlin. Yes. Those are more or less the gods that I think could be the candidates for God 99, and I know that a lot of them, if not none of them, you could argue were actually gods, but I mean, we've got Hercules, Achilles, Medusa, and so on, characters who aren't exactly gods themselves, but have still found a place in the game. Plus, we also have minions, right? And minions aren't gods, and they're part of the battle, okay? Don't forget your minions, that's a crime, probably. So, yeah. And is the Fire Giant a god? Is the Gold Fury a god? Do they count as gods? I mean, I guess the Titans now, at least for Conquest, count as gods. I don't know if the Bull Demon or the creatures in the Joust map count as gods. Perhaps that's another topic for another video. But yeah, actually, now I'm curious. Now, what do you guys think? Do you think all of those extra little NPCs count as gods? Minions, I'd like to say now, probably not. I don't think they count as gods. But, you know, the objectives, like the Fire Giant, is he a god? Is he perhaps from one of the mythologies, like Norse or Greek? Or, you know, is he just there as just an NPC thing? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And, of course, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and